man. You're a good man. We're going to call this meeting to order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I know last time we closed out, we thought it would be the last time for the year, but you know how things go. Sometimes we got to pivot. So this is us pivoting. We have an opportunity to hear a bill, HB 2798. This is in regards to the research institutions. And to kick off the hearing, Jill Walters, the revisers of statutes, the bill brief.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. What this bill does is grant authority to research universities regarding transactions involving real property, buildings, infrastructure, easements, and procurement of goods and services, and exempts those universities from statutes governing such transactions. So Section 1 of the bill would authorize the research universities, and those universities are defined as KU, K-State, and Wichita State, and they would be allowed to promulgate policies that involve the expenditures of state monies, granting each university the power to execute contracts and other agreements for the exercise of the university's powers and functions, including but not limited to making and executing contracts with public or private entities for the operation, management, or support of any research university facilities, programs, or activities. It would authorize them the authority to purchase, acquire, lease, sell, convey, transfer, or dispose of, any research university personal or real property, including intellectual property and any interest therein, and they would be allowed to direct the proceeds from any such transactions. They would be authorized to procure goods, services, materials, supplies, printing, and insurance for the universities without having to use the current law competitive bidding process. They would be authorized to plan, instruct, own, remove, or improve equipment, and appraise and maintain research university buildings, grounds, and infrastructure. But nothing in the bill would prohibit them from still receiving deferred maintenance money from the state. It would also grant them the ability to convey or grant right-of-way easements for utilities and over upon any land. And it would, including those rights would also include parking and playground and other related uses. And then notwithstanding any other law to the contrary, subject to policies promulgated by the universities, and to the extent they relate to statutory requirements, they would be exempt from additional submission, review, or approval of any capital expenditures relating to a capital project, but they still would be required to have their fire prevention code and life safety inspections on those capital improvements, and they'd also be required to have inspections by the state fire marshal. And they would not be subject to additional policies or procedures regarding the procurement, purchase, or contracting for goods or services for real property transactions, including leases, easements, license, and transfers and conveyances. Now, they're allowed to promulgate policies for these things, but please remember that all of these policies that they are that they would be allowed to promulgate, all of these policies would have to be approved by the State Board of Regents prior to implementing these policies. So they could have a policy for that, but it would have been first approved by the Board of Regents. So there is still that Board of Regents approval. The bill also requires each university to maintain an inventory record of all their property. And then no research, specifically states, no research university shall be sold or merged with any other institution unless approved by the state board or the legislature. Then it goes through which statutes don't apply to research universities. Generally, those are statutes concerning purchasing, procurement, and competitive bidding. And then also competitive bidding and project architects, engineering, and land surveyor. So those are exempt from that. And then they're also exempt from the State Surplus Property Act. So the remaining sections really of the bill just clarify that certain statutes still apply to Emporia State, Fort Hays State, and Pittsburgh State, and that certain other statutes don't apply to the research universities. One of the specific ones that I did want to point out to you is in regard to the endowment associations. So under current law, the endowment association is allowed to construct buildings and facilities on state-owned property of the state educational institutions from private monies given to the endowment association. But before that happens, they have to get the approval of the State Board of Regents. The plans have to be approved by the Secretary of Administration. And then they also have to tell the Joint Building Committee, the Joint Committee on State Building Construction, that you're all familiar. They have to do that. So under this bill, it exempts them from that. So that is just one of the things that really kind of stuck out to me that I wanted to be sure and highlight. The other ones really, in those back sections of the amendments, really just talk about bidding, procurement, when they have to have a negotiating committee for architecture services, for land surveying, and for engineering services. So those are really those rest of those statutes, but I did want to point that out to you. And I'd be pleased to stand for questions, sir.
Thank you, Jill. Do we have any questions for the reviser? And just to note, let's just keep the questions pertaining directly to the bill and the legalese of the bill, please. Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Jill, for outlining this. You already answered one of my questions about the capital investment for that process. With this, I know we've had situations where institutions will have, they're looking at an IT contract and they have to get it approved through the DOA. Is this exempt them from that?
Correct.
Okay. One more, if I may, Mr. Chair. Does this pertain to anything regarding the Board of Regents' ability to hire and fire the CEOs of the institutions?
No.
Great.
Still, I mean, I have a follow-up with, on the answer to your first question on IT contracts. I should have clarified, if they have the policies promulgated under this, then yes, that contract would not have to go through the any sort of process through D of A.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jill, my question has to do with the value of assets and how those things are determined, assuming that offers made on a piece of property somewhere, and how that value is placed on that property. If it's just a deal between, the president university, and a buyer, and also included in those assets, let's talk about, the intellectual properties, patents, all of that kind of thing. Those are all covered in this bill, correct? As assets?
Mr. Chairman. So I believe that's really kind of two different questions in my mind. The first one about this doesn't require an appraisal. So I would know that this piece of land is worth $1 million. And then if I wanted to sell it for 750, it doesn't affect that. It doesn't require an appraisal. Now, nothing would stop the the research universities from promulgating policies that said that still said you had to have an appraisal by disinterested parties. I mean, nothing would prohibit policies, but this does not, the current statutes that talk about that would not apply to that transaction anymore. And then in regard to your next question about intellectual property, it specifically says if there's intellectual property sold, that the research universities would be able to dispose of the monies from that as they saw fit, or deposit or move the money as they saw fit.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. And Jill, talking about the money, where does the money go, especially on, say, a facility that was, I don't know if we have, buildings that were paid 100% with tax money, but where does that money go?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Amix, so the bill specifically says that the policies that are promulgated by each research university would determine and direct where the proceeds from that transaction would go.
Chair, I read it, but I wanted to hear it from Jill. Anyway, thank you.
Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Jill, thank you for the overview on this. My first question is circling back to the power of K-Board, and they are still able to approve the policy that's adopted by the university. And I believe you said it, and I apologize for the repeat, but on page 3, the line 5, the new section, that 3740, that seems to eliminate those research universities to have a third-party independent appraiser. And that's been a topic there. Is that true? That do they need to have an independent appraiser in order to sell the product or the property?
Mr. Chairman, unless they would adopt a policy that did that, or excuse me, promulgate a policy that did that, I don't think they would have to.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, can K-Board insist that policy, that they have an independent appraise?
Chairman, I think that would be a negotiation between the research university and KBOR. Because how I read this, if it comes down to, I'm the research university, you're KBOR, I say X, you say Y, we're at a standstill.
Okay.
And X doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chair, one last question, if I may. The bill itself, accreditors like the Higher Learning Commission often will count syllabi as the academic contract between the school and the student. Is there anything in here that address academic related decisions, contracts, anything related to that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haskins, I don't think anything really drives that unless, I mean, is it actually a signed contract or is it implied between, because I guess I didn't think, like, when I'm a student and I'm paying tuition and that's not really a contract with the university, that I think this bill would cover.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joel, one of the questions on page 1 at the bottom about intellectual property. So you mentioned that the universities under this new system would receive all the money. It would be totally up to them. Well, how is it handled under the current system? You know, if you're a research university, you know, there's some big breakthrough that you're responsible for. How do the funds, the proceeds go currently under the current system?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wagner, if I could let a representative of the Board of Regents answer that question, I'd be more comfortable with that, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
If I can follow up. So as far as, you know, currently the budgets from all 3 of these universities, you know, come through the state or, you know, through this committee and appropriations and such. So would that still be the case, or it would only be the part that's state general fund, or how does that work? What happens to the legislature in this, you know, new procedure?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Wagner, I believe that it would be completely up to you as legislators, as it is now, if you would give X, Y, and Z funding. And then those state funds are required to follow these promulgated policies by the research universities.
All right, thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Jill, you thought you were out, but I got one more here. So along what you just answered, what's not clear to me is, since the K-Board's overseeing SGF funding, do the research institutions, do they still need to go to K-Board to get approval for tuition increases? Because tuition increases is a price point, and if the customer is the student, do they still need to have approval for that?
Chairman, I don't believe anything in this bill touches that issue. That if the regions are, I recall how we describe it as their budgets go through KBOR and then KBOR approves or rejects that. I don't think anything prohibits that from changing, or anything in the bill makes that change.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Jill, does this bill change KBOR's constitutional charge as it exists under its current statute in any way? 743202 Charlie base is what I'm referring to. Does it
Mr.
change
Chairman,
that at all? It's
I don't
fundamental.
believe so, but I would reserve the right to review it again, but I don't believe so.
Any further questions for Jill? Looks like you're off the hook. Thank you, Jill, very, very much. Appreciate it. We're going to start with proponent testimony, and to kick this off, we've got the majority leader, Chris Croft. Welcome to committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, a little bit about the history of how we got here. This just didn't happen overnight. This is something that's been talked about for a while. Back in the fall, the speaker initiated a conversation with a few folks, just starting to ask some questions, and then he decided at a meeting to have a conversation with several of the presidents or the leaders of the universities. And just started asking them some more questions and went through and just trying to understand what might be the options as we move forward. Obviously looking forward to, how could we make sure that as we're out there, as people are looking at our universities, how are they the best? And the people around the country know that they're the best. So that was kind of the impetus behind how this thing started. And it kind of started growing from there. And then it got involved with the three R1s, if you will, the research university presidents and this chancellor. And he asked them some questions and said, hey, could you help me understand what some of the best practices are around the country in other universities and other systems that are out there? And so they gave him some information. And as they continued to have this dialogue, then they started bringing more folks into it. So it's not been everybody at the beginning, but as it started moving, and then it got to a point where the governor got involved in this and then said, we need a formalized structure. And she took charge of that structure in that group meeting and appointed the chief of staff to run that meeting. And we all appointed one person. I was that person appointed for the House, the Senate president for the Senate, and then various other people that were in there, the presidents and the leaders. And so we all had these conversations. We said, okay, what is it what we're trying to do? And here was the general gist of the thing. What we wanted to do was enable our research universities. And again, we were talking about the research right now, those three, K-State, KU, and Wichita State. We did say we were going to have the conversations about the regionals and the community colleges and technical colleges at a later point. So this was where we started. We didn't really get to the other parts of it because we got so consumed into this one. But the goal was, how do we enable our research universities to operate at the speed of innovation and to drive that speed of innovation? So that's the underlying thing in everything that we were trying to do. So as you're trying to figure out what we were trying to do in this language, that's it. In that process, we went back and said, okay, what are the stumbling blocks? What are the barriers to you achieving that goal? And they gave us a list, and I forget how long the list was. It was pretty long the first time we looked at it, maybe 13, 15 pages of stuff. And it was some good stuff in there, and they still exist. And every meeting we had that was chaired by the chief of staff, he drove us to get it a little bit better, a little bit more narrow, a little bit more focused on the top things. And at the end of the day, we settled on these are the top three things, and that's what you see in this bill, the top three things that they said that are barriers for them for now and how we move forward. And so that's the goal, and that's the underlying impetus behind all this thing. So it's exclusively in the bill. We know this one was specifically for the research universities. There was talk about the regionals, and if that's where you want to go with it too, I'm not going to be opposed to those things. Pursuant, as you already heard, the policies as they talk about contracts, they talk about purchasing, holding, leasing, and trading and selling property. Although I do want to highlight almost kind of, well, however, they may not sell the university. As ridiculous as that seems, we wanted to make sure that wasn't something that could happen. So as we're moving them forward to operating more like a business and being able to be very effective at where they go, we didn't want to give them so much latitude they could actually sell the university. Procure them goods, services, materials, you heard all that, repair, buildings, grounds, infrastructure, Exempt from some of the state architectural requirements, but understand that this has also started a conversation about some of them. Would be open to those discussions about not necessarily going as far as we have, and I'm open to that. And then grant and convey right of way. What this does is it relieves the R1s that in this bill of the costly bureaucratic entanglements while applying the appropriate oversight. We're not taking away oversight. We're just elevating our level for us, the legislators. We still have oversight in everything you've already heard, and it's up to us to make sure we do that. As we exercise our muscles in what we do here, this does not eliminate that. In fact, it makes it more important that we stay involved in things. It makes great strides to improve the efficiencies and flexibilities and the competitiveness of our research universities. When you go out there and you look at universities and you say, okay, engineering, robotics, many people think MIT. When they think of nuclear, do you think they think about K-State? We have a nuclear reactor at K-State. We are one of the best at KU when you're starting to talk about your medical, the autism, the cancer research. Some people know it, but we want them to be the best. They're right here, one of the few universities that actually have national security. You have Army's University right up the road, and they've tagged with them. They're the leaders in getting certifications for soldiers as they leave the military and then transition to public life. But nobody knows these things. We have Wichita State with what they're doing and saving single-handedly air platforms and going through this process. We need to make sure we enable them to do the things they need to do even better. We are on an opportunity right now to grow this involvement in our state and actually put us right in the center, as we are in the center of this country, but have everybody looking here. We want all eyes on Kansas, not just because we're Kansas, because we have the best research universities and a university structure. That is our goal. As I've said before, we're open to a few technical changes we've talked about. We're starting to hear the conversations. Would love to have that. We recognize that this wasn't an end-all be-all. It is we put the stuff on the paper finally after all the conversations, and believe that this is a good faith effort for where we're trying to go. I want to thank the governor's office and the chief of staff for all his hard work and having to deal with me most days. It probably wasn't fun. And just as we're negotiating as we move forward, and the university presidents and the chancellor have been at this thing at our request. I want to make sure you understand we're the one that requested this. So if you have some ill will towards them on that, please don't, because they've trying to be responsive to what the legislature has asked them to do, which is to provide us information as we try to make better decisions and have the best universities in the country. And that's what we want. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll stand for questions if you want, or I can wait till later.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. Do we have any questions from the Majority Leader while he's here? Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you already talked about this a little bit, but could you go explain more about why it was only the big three universities that were chosen for this bill and these changes rather than the regional universities?
Mr. Chair. Yeah, fair enough. And what the original intent was actually to include more. We just basically ran out of time as we went forward and said, okay, we're at this point in time. Let's draw a line and go from here. Not opposed to including the regionals if that's what we want to do. I just want to make sure the intent here was also to say, okay, let's do a little bit. Let's make sure we grow into what we're supposed to do, and we'll move forward and continue to do these things. And if you think that we need to include the regionals, we will not be opposed to that. It was just, we put a line in the sand at some point, time ran out, and look at how late in the game we are right now. We couldn't wait any longer, but we also wanted to make sure we went through the process fully to get all the questions answered and make sure we weren't stepping out and stepping across the line and messing something up. So.
Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader, for your testimony. One of the Humphreys that's going after you from the governor's office proposed an amendment to strike the language to the extent such policies involve the expenditures of state monies. If that were to go on, is this something you'd still feel like it accomplishes what you're setting out to do?
Yeah, we do. And we've talked about it ahead of time. And again, this has caused more dialogue and more discussion, and we're okay with that as we continue to move forward. We just don't want to go too far, right? And I believe that this one, and talking with the chief of staff, we've been communicating quite a bit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anything-
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I forgot technology first.
You're good, it's fine. I see two colleagues talking back and forth. It's all right. Forget it. Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader, on this. When I visited with the chancellors before, the nil policy came up, athletics came up, and that how difficult it is to stay competitive when, $15 million has to be given to a student. Where did that lie in this whole conversation that you had in prep?
Mr. Chair, speaking about NIL, I don't remember us having any conversations about NIL. This was more about what were the roadblocks for them to being able to operate as more efficiently, effectively from their administrative duties and other things they had to do specifically in these lanes right here.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you for that. And then the second question I have is on the private equity firms that would be eligible to purchase, Allen Fieldhouse or anybody can have the right to look at buying that property under policies if they're decided on. What extent of security for Kansans was given and thought for making sure these private equity firms that own the buildings, the property, will be true to Kansas and not be sold to a multinational corporation or even an international corporation?
Sure. I kind of wish you hadn't have done that, because now I think Wichita State and K-State might actually try to buy Allen Fieldhouse. I'm just being, because they have put in bills before to renovate the building. We've joked about that. That's one of my amendments I tried to put in for fun, and it didn't go well. Anyways, well, part of what you already heard too is that the policies that we're talking about all have to be still approved by and promulgated through the Board of the Regents. So it's not like it's just all hands off. It's just trying to reduce some of that burden that they go through, the 4 different steps instead of taking one step, right? And I believe, and I have every confidence that we still have that protection in place.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Majority Leader. So a couple of things people have asked me about. One is on the legislature and the universities have had a bit of a tug of war over, DEI policies and as far as things being followed through with. How would this change affect that oversight?
Mr. Chair, I honestly, I don't think this has any effect on what already is in place for those policies administrative. If as you go through this thing, you believe that it has, then I would say put some things on there to make sure you do that. But I do not believe that this alleviated any of that responsibility that we've already placed on them from a legislative perspective.
If I could, the question about, so if, University of Kansas wants to raise its tuition 10%, is it totally their decision then? How does this affect anything about how tuition increases are handled?
Mr. Chair, I actually don't believe this affects that at all in that process, because again, you still have all the policies and procedures they have to go through K-Board, through us. We still have oversight responsibilities, still come to us and ask for things. So I don't believe it changes all that. And if you find that it does, I'd love to have that additional conversation. And maybe the revisor.
I might point the attention to Jill. Jill, if in your review you see anything like that you might think would be a vehicle for that, please bring it to my attention. I'll bring it to the committee's attention.
Fair enough.
Further for the majority leader.
I have one more question.
I'm going to go to Representative Amix, and I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Majority Leader. Just a question about the legislature's role in all of this. Do you believe that we are giving up anything of our current responsibilities by, adopting this bill?
I actually do not. I think what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we understand our role is to have ultimate oversight. And I think what it does is it takes us and puts us in a place where we are looking and holding the Board of Regents responsible, as well as the board looking at as they oversee the universities and how they do things, but we don't get involved in their day-to-day operations. That's kind of what we're trying to do, is allow them that freedom to be flexible, to move and to do the various things that they need to do. I think it actually still just puts responsibility on us to make sure we're watching.
Follow up. Representative Wagner.
Thank you. Mr. Majority Leader, so as far as the submission of budgets and such as that, approval by the legislature, would that still be a part, or would they be independent enough that that would not no longer be necessary?
Sure, I didn't know if that would be one that, because I didn't see that in there, that would take any of that away from them. It all still stays as a responsibility to submit all the things that they do.
Thank you.
It just, yeah, anyways, again, it gets rid of some of the day-to-day freedoms so they can operate. Is that's what you see here with the things we're talking about.
Representative KR. And then we're going to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's a lot to go through in not a lot of time. The difference that that sticks out to me is that most businesses don't receive millions of dollars from the government, and that's where the oversight comes in.
Right.
So what I'd like to see, and what concerns me a little bit, is when there's appraisals waived and the things that were purchased with potential taxpayer dollars, and then there's no oversight in where those taxpayer dollars are then going. I'd love the opportunity to dig through it a little bit more, make sure there's some accountability and checks and balances there would be really helpful.
All right. Thank you.
Just real quick, again, remember that while it feels like there's not all the accountability, you still have the rules and you have to go through the Board of Regents and promulgate all the different policies and procedures that go with that. And so we're not walking away from all of it. We're just looking. And two, remember, we provide about 17% of their whole overall budget. They still have a lot of other things that are out there. So we're not eliminating them from it, but trying to enable them to do everything that they can do to really get after the issues and operate at that speed of innovation that we need them to be. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Majority
Yes,
Leader.
sir.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Will Lawrence, Chief of Staff, Kansas Governor's Office. Welcome to committee, sir. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Will Lawrence, Governor Kelly's Chief of Staff. You have my testimony. I won't read through that, but I think I would just say at the outset, I agree with the Majority Leader on this process being one that's been having conversations over the course of the fall and into the spring. And I think there's a strong desire to have a broader and deeper look at Board of Regents governance, which includes policies and things like that. Obviously, that's going to take some time, and we want to make sure that everyone's at the table and that we can have a thorough review that comes up with good recommendations that everyone agrees with that deals with some of these issues. So in those conversations, which are still ongoing, we identified certain areas that right now our universities, our research universities, could use some flexibility in. So that's where this came from and where we identified some narrow issues to deal with. And so, you know, I think for me, one of the things I think is really important to talk about is, and one of the things that we like is that, you know, right now, the Regents have a ton of work that they do every day, overseeing all these different institutions. And so in this narrow space where our 3 universities are already doing a lot of this work on procurement and stuff like that, the ability to allow them to draft policies that work for their institution that then must be approved by the Board of Regents is good for both institutions. And the reason for that is one, it takes some of the workload off of the regents and having to draft all these different policies. It puts them in the driver's seat of approving policies and reviewing them. So when these policies come up related to procurement or property transactions or things like that, the Board of Regents will have the opportunity to request revisions and things be included and make sure that we have proper oversight. And so I think that's really important when we think about this. There was never any intent to change the legislature's role, who has constant oversight. I think to the question of private equity firms, if that became a conversation, I suspect the legislature would become very interested and would have some opportunities to deal with that as well as through the Board of Regents. So I think while it's always important to look at legislation and think about the worst possible scenarios to make sure you're not missing something, I do think that there's been some looks at this initial language that's maybe been a little bit overblown. It does give a lot of flexibility, not from the legislative role, but from the state procurement laws. That gives them some nimbleness and not having to go through the D of A process, which has been part of our conversation and creating that flexibility. So that's a lot of what you see in here, but still making sure that the Board of Regents itself has to approve any policy that comes from the regions or from the universities, and that they have to live within those procedures. I think, well, let me get to the amendment, or I have two amendments that I've requested. The first one is dealing with the definition of state monies. And to give a little bit of explanation on where that came from, as we've been having these meetings, the last one we had on Monday was centered around some conversation on whether or not this language would change the current role of the Board of Regents for handling private money and endowment money in these type of projects. Currently, the Board of Regents has a process that is more narrow when it comes to the private funds. So they have some level of oversight and approval, but it doesn't go through the same process as all the state funds. So there was a discussion about whether or not this language pulled all of those funds into this same process. So the research universities discussed adding some language to clarify that. In this meeting, we were all in it, including the Board of Regents. No one had any heartburn over that concept. Now, once that language got put in the bill that's on page 1, there became some concerns that this would go the other way and preclude the Board of Regents from having any insight over private funds, or oversight over private funds or endowment funds. So what we want to do here is to address the concerns of the regents, is to simply strike the definition of state monies and then strike the related sentence in new section 1B, so that the language would read pursuant to policies promulgated by research universities and also approved by the state board, to maintain all of that, but not to have it so clearly tied to just state monies. And additionally, in my conversations with the Board of Regents, I don't believe there's any intent for them to try to take in more oversight of things that they are currently doing. They're not trying to take all of the private funds and put it through a greater process than it is now. They want to maintain their current process. And I think that, to my knowledge, alleviates concerns of both sides and still allows us to move forward. The second amendment is dealing with the regional universities. And when we started having these conversations, again, agree with the majority leader, because the regionals were not in those conversations, we didn't want to put them in the bill, have them learn about it from the bill, freak out, not know what it is. So we kept it narrowed to the 3 research universities. Now that this language has been socialized, my understanding from the regional universities is they see advantages here and would like to be included as well. And we're okay with that. So, and I believe the majority leader is as well. So that's the second amendment that I would ask consideration of, just to make sure that, you know, now that they've socialized it, they like it, they feel comfortable with it, it makes sense. So that's the reason it went in the way that it did. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I probably could say other things, but I'll save it for later, and happy to stand for any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Couple questions, and you said you've requested those amendments to be drafted, so we'll see those soon?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Any questions for the Chief of Staff? Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chief of Staff, for your overview. And, you know, I I truly appreciate the governor's being involved in this. Since it didn't seem like a minority voice was a part of the committee, it's nice to have you there. And I understand, and I would actually support your amendment on state monies, because that's where I get the concern that tuition dollars are actually can be made an argument for that, specifically for state aid to students. I want to circle back to the Board of Regents policy. Now, I believe that the K Board has to approve the policy. In the bill, what is the enforcement if the university decides to bypass that policy or doesn't follow it exactly? What's the next step?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative Haskins, I guess what I would say is, I mean, because once you implement these policies through this process, I mean, they have to follow those policies. So, there would be various levels of action enforcement being taken, and I think that Board of Regents currently has authority to do those things, and so they're not giving that up. Frankly, the only thing that's being removed here is some of the law related to the procurement process and things, through D of A. So I guess what I would say is that maybe D of A wouldn't necessarily have the ability to take an action in that sense, but it wouldn't, alleviate or remove any responsibilities or authorities of the Board of Regents in that regard.
Mr. Chair, one more question. Thank you for that. And I guess I'm not surprised that we have this bill. Matter of fact, I've been talking about this direction for years, and based upon the diminishing SGF that's happening to the universities. I would just like assurance that this isn't the beginning of the end for K Board, and that this is something that we still see a value. I know it doesn't change anything in the Constitution, but that doesn't mean that can't come next, or we just diminish them completely. What's the governor's stance on the Kansas Board of Regents and the future of the K Board as a governing group?
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman and Representative Haskins, I guess what I would say is that, I mean, the governor certainly appreciates the current model. It's been in place for a long time. Does that mean that we shouldn't look at the governance structure? No, of course we should. There's always, we have all kinds of systems out there to look at to determine what is best. But in terms of doing away with the Board of Regents or that governance structure, there's certainly no support for that. It's important to make sure that there is proper oversight, and also making sure that the regents can do that proper oversight. They have a lot of responsibilities to a lot of institutions right now across the state. And so, where I think we can make it easier for both sides while making sure we're not losing any of that authority and responsibility, and also accountability is important. So the governor strongly supports that, supports these conversations, and does not want to see, any type of erosion of the Board of Regents.
Thank you, Mr. Chief of Staff. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anything further? Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lawrence, thank you for being here. And I was wondering, the majority leader kind of alluded to the fact that, you folks in these discussions looked at some other states, how they were doing things. I mean, is there any sort of direction that this is more akin to some other state, how it currently handles higher ed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Wagner. So I think in the very early discussions on all of this, it was more centered around governance and, looking at current Board of Regents and the way it's set up, looking at Washburn as an example and how it's different. And I think, I'm trying to remember what state it was. Tennessee was a state that was being looked at, who recently underwent a pretty big transformation in how they handle their research universities, their regionals, their community colleges and stuff like that. So there was initial conversation around those concepts. That felt like a very big conversation that could not be accomplished in one legislative session. And so that's where the conversations with the governor and the speaker and the Senate president and our university presidents and the Board of Regents centered around. There needs to be a longer conversation that probably requires bringing in an outside entity to look at our current system and make recommendations. If the Board of Regents needs to have a governance structure change, we need to understand how that would impact everyone underneath that. And that was too broad of a conversation. So that led to discussions about how do we start that process of an RFP, an expert to come in and take this broad look. In those conversations, we identified a list of issues that could be addressed right now that are currently in state statute that then KBOR policy branches off of. And so if we modify these statutes, it allows KBOR and the university to work out some more flexibility to make some of their stuff easier, to some of their work easier to do in the process while we have this broader conversation. So this is an attempt to try to address some concerns and keep the broader conversation going and making sure that they have enough time that this is done correctly and not rushed through a process, but also soften some things.
Anything further? Seeing none. Looks like you got off the hot seat there. Appreciate you
Mr. Chairman.
for coming in today. We're going to move on to our opponent testimony. And to lead that off, we've got Blake Benson, Chair, Kansas Board of Regents.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As the chairman mentioned, my name is Blake Benson. I have the pleasure of serving as the chair of the Kansas Board of Regents this year. Appreciate the opportunity to discuss House Bill 2798. You have my written testimony, which I obviously will not read, but I do want to point out a couple of important points that have been raised today. First of all, I do want to assure all of you that the Kansas Board of Regents supports efforts to streamline processes and reduce unnecessary or overly burdensome regulations for our universities. And in that spirit, we support much of what is in House Bill 2798. You've heard a couple of times about ongoing discussions about what this could look like. We were a part of those conversations. We were comfortable with those conversations, and we actually even had a document ready to go for us to review at our board meeting yesterday that would have gained board support for many of these processes that we would have enabled our universities to seek exemptions from. However, the bill that was introduced yesterday did have a couple of differences that caused us concern, and you've heard about those today, so I just want to make sure that I go on record as pointing those out. First of all, would respectfully request the removal of the definition of state monies, as Chief of Staff Lawrence mentioned in lines 17 and 18. And in addition, beginning on line 19, we would ask that the phrase, "and to the extent such policies involve the expenditures of state monies," be stricken. Because as you've heard today, we do believe this language would create unnecessary ambiguity and unintended consequences in the application of policies. Further, as you've also heard today, and I appreciate Mr. Woodard bringing that up earlier, the creating a new statutory category of research universities, which would distinguish them differently from the regional state university, or pardon me, the regional universities, which are also so crucial to our state. The board would respectfully request that any statutory changes intended to improve the efficiency and operations be applied consistently across all of our state universities rather than creating separate classifications. So, Mr. Chairman, with these two changes that you've already heard about today, the Board of Regents would today be supportive of House Bill 2798 and its goal of improving university processes and operational efficiency. Without these changes, you've heard there could be concerns about the public nature and accountability of our state universities. And so in closing, I will just say that the Board of Regents is committed to ensuring that our universities operate efficiently, effectively, and responsibly. And we will continue to work with our institutions to identify challenges and potential statutory changes that could be brought forward collaboratively to the legislature. Our goal is to preserve accountability for public assets while thoughtfully addressing operational concerns across all state universities. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'll be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Benson, do we have any questions for Mr. Benson? Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chair Benson, for your testimony. And welcome to our life. 9 weeks in, and we're still introducing bills that are being heard the next day. So we feel your pain of trying to get prepared with the pace. I Just because it came up, can you answer whether or not you believe this has anything to do with your ability to deny or approve tuition increases?
That was one of the questions that we had as the board considered this yesterday, because that's not specifically addressed. We worried that the case could be made that tuition dollars would not qualify as state dollars. So that would remove our oversight of that. So that would have been our concern, but we can't say for sure.
But if the amendment goes on, then
Correct.
that satisfies your.
Correct.
concern.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anything further? Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Benson, okay, so I have your written testimony, but you've basically flipped from being an opponent to being a proponent if you had one or two changes.
Those two changes, Representative Wagner and Mr. Chairman, the removal of the definition of state monies, and then the phrase, "and to the extent such policies involve the expenditure of state monies," be stricken. That would be one request we would have, and the other would be the addition of the regional universities. Very similar to what you just heard from Chief of Staff Lawrence.
So if I could ask a second question. So, I mean, but you had some, sort of an interesting critique in it of, your written critique. I mean, do those points not still stand, or you don't think they're critical to the discussion?
We would consider many of the concerns null and void if the language related to state monies were removed.
Thank you.
Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony and being here. And I'm a little surprised with the switch of stance, but I understand where you're coming from on that. A couple questions I have. First one is, I'm really concerned about on page 1, line 24, and execute contracts. Last year was a pretty popular request by Emporia State to have the flexibility to be able to terminate tenure faculty and have a little bit more flexibility on terminating or what tenure looks like. Are there any concerns or discussions about how we protect the faculty and the academics when it comes to this?
Well, of course, the academics and the faculty are crucial to the success of our institutions, Representative Haskins and Mr. Chairman. As we look through this, and given the time that we've had to look through this, we don't see anything that would address anything to that point.
Mr. Chair, one last question, if I may. I just want someone on the record to tell me who owns the university. Is it a private entity based on the fact that they have to make up 85% of the funding on their own, or is it a public entity? I mean, do Kansans own the university, or is it just completely removed from that?
And I've put our general counsel on the spot a lot over the last couple of months as we've had these conversations. I know that property at our universities is owned by the Board of Regents. It's in the name of the Board of Regents. But John, you may be, if it would be appropriate, Mr. Chair, could I ask our general counsel to answer that question to ensure that it's correct? Is that appropriate?
I'll allow it. What's his name?
John Urie.
John Urie. Please come to the podium. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chair. The question is, who owns the universities?
Simply that. Who owns the university? Do you believe Kansas?
Universities are state agencies, executive branch agencies of the state of Kansas, owned by the state of Kansas.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anything further for Chairman Benson? I've got one question.
Yes, sir.
In your opinion, does this bill direct any existing policies and practices regarding academics, employment, faculty, staff, students, setting of tuition, or programs or degrees? Does this impact any of those things?
With the removal of the amendments that we have requested, I don't believe so.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for your time and testimony today.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right up next on the opponent side is Terry Humphrey, Executive Director, American Institute of Architects.
Good afternoon, Chairman Turk and members of the committee. I am Terry Humphrey. I'm Executive Director of the American Institute of Architects Kansas chapter, a professional association representing more than 650 architects and associates in Kansas. AI Kansas understands the need for an efficient procurement process without burdensome administrative requirements. However, House Bill 2798 poses some concerns, and therefore, at this time, we have to oppose the bill as written. We do understand, though, from some of the previous testimony that this is a work in progress, and so we'd like to be part of that discussion. What I would like to share with you is that AI Kansas stands in strong support of the Kansas statutes that establish qualifications-based selection procurement process. This process is a transparent and fair process, and it relies on open competition. Without assurances that the state universities will continue to follow qualifications-based selection for procuring architectural services, AI Kansas must oppose this legislation as written. AI Kansas welcomes the opportunity, as I said, to be part of this discussion, but our focus is on quality-based selection for the purpose of procurement, which is fair, cost-effective, and we believe in the best interest of the citizens of our state. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'll be happy to stand for questions at the right time.
Thank you. Any questions for the conferee? Seeing none. Thank you very much. All right. Up next to wrap this off, I asked the Chancellor of KU, Dr. Draw, to be here to answer questions. Many of the things in all three of the big three's testimonies this year in front of this committee are connected to this piece of legislation, and I thought we needed somebody to have as a sounding board, answer some questions maybe that got in the weeds. So, Chancellor, thank you for being here. Thank you for providing your time and your testimony. The floor is yours.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the invitation to come today. And you've heard a lot today already. I want to thank everybody for the partnership through this conversation to achieve where we are today. And I think it's been really sincerely out of an attempt to figure out how to make us all more effective, more efficient, and more cost effective as well. This moment in time in higher education, you would hear this from any of my colleagues, not just at the research universities, but 6 universities or the private universities, that higher education is facing tremendous headwinds right now, whether it's challenges in the enrollment side, as we're all aware of the enrollment cliff that's coming our direction, significant challenges for us as research universities, instability at the federal level. Currently our federal grants are down 70% year over year so far this year. And that's not unique to the University of Kansas. So uncertainty there, to be sure. Obviously, tuition is which we do rely on is very price sensitive. And that is not an easy way to go when you start talking about revenue. And then we all in this room are very aware of the challenges at the state level and state funding, and doesn't look like that's going to go away anytime soon. So we are just really challenged on all fronts. And despite the fact, and I'll speak now to KU, we have our highest enrollment in the history of the university. We have the most research dollars in the history of the university, and we are cutting 141 jobs, and we've cut $30 million out of the operating budget at KU this year alone. We've cut $145 million out of our operating budget since 2017. Those issues aren't going away either. So when talking with our colleagues of what are the levers that are left to play here, it's really becoming more effective and more efficient and be able to take some of those administrative dollars out of the system and push them where we need them, which is in salaries for our people and for our infrastructure. And so that's really where these conversations started. As you heard today, conversations have narrowed down to what can we actually do statutorily. So what are the barriers that the statute creates for us? And quite honestly, significant redundancies that it creates for us. And we are a state agency. We're still a state agency after this bill should have passed, except for these exclusions that are defined in this bill only. But we do remain a state agency. We're a state asset. We are state owned. If anybody can't sell us, but the state could sell us. I wish you luck finding a buyer, but the state could sell us. And so we are not trying to change that, nor are we trying to change our governance structure in the sense of who's got the authority over us. In fact, I would argue this creates more authority for the Board of Regents and oversight in this area, where there's going to be perhaps less oversight at the state level, there's more oversight at the Board of Regents level, and we look forward to those conversations. We currently do extensive work outside of the state funding line in terms of procurement and construction, and we have very open, very robust procurement processes for those. They just don't go through the state because we don't need to for those. And we certainly anticipate that continuing in the future, and that would be our conversation with the regents of what policy should look like. And what does it look like if we do want to sell a building? Who has to approve that? That's got to be in the policies. Then we have to come to agreement on that. So I look forward to those conversations as we continue to look for ways to squeeze efficiencies out of the system and redirect those resources to our people and our students. And with that, sir, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Chancellor, any questions for the Chancellor? All right, Representative Amix?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chancellor, it's great to see you today. Because of this particular piece of legislation, do you see other needs of legislation as you talk to your staff need to come forward to correct other problems that are out there because of this?
Mr. Chair. Yeah, thank you, Representative Amix. I don't think this causes anything else to come out of it, if that's your question. Are there other areas of efficiency that are out there? I think there could be, and those are the conversations that we'll need to continue to have over the months to years ahead to see about what else makes sense. But I don't think this will cause us to go to require something else, if that's your question. I appreciate it.
Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chancellor, for testimony and for the committee for having me back for today. It feels good to be back in this room. Some of the biggest pieces of voting for the House budget that I had were, one, not including state employee raises, and also a tuition cap, which once again is this building trying to do the Board of Regents job for them. I think that should be a decision for them. But layered on top of that also cuts university. If something like this were to come through, if you are able to find those efficiencies, how would you prioritize that funding?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. And the reality is anywhere that we can find resources right now, our number one priority is our people. Because doesn't matter if we have pretty buildings, if there's nobody in them and we can't serve our students, then we're not going to meet our mission. So it really is trying to direct as much resources as we can to salaries for faculty and staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep, thank you. Minority leaders egging me on today, really trying to dig deep, trying to get me fired up.
No comments, sir.
I have a quick question. Oh, actually, you know what? For my question, I'll go to Representative Wagner. He beat me to it. So go ahead, Representative Wagner.
Yes, Dr. Gerard Z. One of the questions that has come up is as far as the notion that the university might sell some, rights to its football field or somehow privatize it, profit off of it. I mean, if you did pursue such, does this make it easier for University of Kansas to do such a thing? Do you see that this reduces some barriers that otherwise would have prevented that?
Chancellor. Yeah. Thank you for that question. I don't really see that reason. Again, we're going to do exactly what we do today until we have an opportunity to work with regents to redefine policies, and I fully expect that level of oversight will exist at the regents level and continue to be so in the future. I don't see it facilitating a transaction such as you described. Having said that, we do some of those things today. If you will notice, there is a logo on the basketball court, right? So those are activities we already do and will continue to do, and hopefully we can do more of, because that would help. But in terms of selling the football field, I don't see that being possible in our environment.
You don't foresee Fraser Hall brought to you by Pepsi?
No comment. The Coke would be very upset, but.
And just real quickly, also the intellectual property. You guys have quite a good, cancer research a reputation, and say you get some huge breakthrough. Just some earth-shattering, it'd be worth a lot of money. Does this change how the funds that would benefit from that are handled?
It would not. There already is current KBOR policy over intellectual property. That's a high-level policy. We have a more specific one for each of the research universities. And it only speaks very directly to how those revenues are dispersed. Some of that goes to the inventor. Some of that goes to the unit supporting the inventor. The rest comes to the university. And in our case, we just plow that right back into the research enterprise.
Thank you.
Anything further for the chancellor? Oh, yes, Representative Haskins.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Chancellor. I wanted, I understand the logic behind this. And if we give you permission, like, okay, and the policy is there, go sell your property or go sell the intellectual property rights, all right? Winner, winner, chicken dinner, okay? My question to you though is, you got $200 million from the state. The next year we come back and we say, we're only going to give you 100 million. And the reason for that is we know you could sell some property. Would you take this deal over that?
No.
And why?
The only thing that allows us to make education affordable in this state is the support that we get from the state. And really, those monies really support the educational mission. They're not supporting the research or the athletics. They're supporting the education mission. If we want to keep it affordable, we're going to need to continue to have state support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Chancellor, I got a few questions for you here.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Jotting them down, trying to be patient, so hopefully I can remember them all. First and foremost, are you restricted in any way from using your KU student architects in any of your projects on campus? Is there something that I'm missing with the architectural component of this? Are you able to use your students to assist you in projects on campus?
They do help us with design concepts, absolutely, as part of their training. They aren't necessarily always the ones we use, and they aren't usually the final product that we use, but they do provide. And even when we bring outside architects in, which we do most of the time, they engage our students in those conversations.
Just for our situational awareness, my situational awareness, my own edification on this, as I see it, this bill primarily creates efficiencies. You're reducing steps. Yes, you have to go through the board. You have to go through D of A to get a lot of this stuff processed. We're just the intent of the bill, even if the language doesn't quite match quite yet. The intent of the bill is to remove red tape, make things that take 18 months take half that time, and et cetera, et cetera. Is that correct?
That's certainly our aspiration, yes, sir.
I think we have our work cut out for us here. Chancellor, thanks for being here today. Thank you for answering our questions. Anything you want to leave us with before you go?
Just appreciate the consideration. These are challenging times for the state and the universities, and I know together we can get through it.
All right, committee. It has been made crystal clear to me and mentioned here in testimony that this is a bill that requires work. All right, and that's okay. Sometimes we don't have control over a lot of things, and time is of an essence. We've known that since the first day we set foot in the building this session. We can control what we can control, and we deal with what we can't, and sometimes things just work out this way. And this is we heard all kinds of testimony throughout the year talking about efficiencies, and we can go back and forth on how we navigate it. The truth is, yes, I believe KBOR still has a reason, a role, and a reason to be in higher education. I don't feel like that is under attack today or under threat. Something that's established years and years ago. Times change, right? Things change. We need refinement. We've heard from both sides that they all agree on that, and I think it's kind of be up to us to guide how that looks in this piece of legislation. We'll be working this on Monday. So in the meantime, we have work to do. We've got proposed amendments that are being worked on. If you've got thoughts, if you've got opinions on what this should look like, work the amendments from your side, work with me, and we will put together a product that pass the floor. Before we leave today, any questions, thoughts, opinions? I know Representative Haskins has several. He's written all over his face. For a thespian, you don't hide very well. Your thoughts, yeah. All right. Thank you, Minority Leader, for filling in today. It was good to see you. One side jab aside, I'll get you back later. Representative Mosier filled in as well. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You can take one of the checks off the list of IOUs from me. Appreciate it very much. And again, committee, thanks for rejoining me one more time for another adventure in higher education budget. With that, we are adjourned.